want to take this opportunity of speaking to all Welsh people, not only in this arena, but wherever they may be. The British Empire and Commonwealth Games in the capital, together with all the activities of the Festival of Wales, have made this a memorable year for the Principality. I have therefore decided to mark it further by an act which will, I hope, give as much pleasure to all Welshmen as it does to me. I intend to create my son Charles, Prince of Wales, today. When he is grown up, I will present him to you at Caernarfon.
How precisely did you hear that you were going to be Prince of Wales?
Well, I think it was, I remember sitting in the headmaster's study at Cheam, and we were all watching the television, and there were several other boys there, little ones. I remember being acutely embarrassed when it was announced, and I had this marvelous great cheer coming from the stadium in Cardiff. And I think for a little boy of 9, it was rather bewildering. I seem to remember, all the others turned and looked at me in sort of amazement. And it perhaps didn't mean all that much then. Later on, as I grew older, it became more apparent what it meant. And now it's even more apparent what it means.
Well, that was the beginning of the 11-year conscious process, I suppose you could say, that brings you to Caernarfon next Tuesday. The last stage in which has been this period at the University of Wales at Aberystwyth, learning Welsh. There have been stories that you've had rather a lonely time there. Is this so?
Well, yes, I wonder where these reports come from, but I suppose they circulate. You see, the trouble is that one has to remember that I'm in a slightly different position from several other people. And I think they try and put themselves in my position too much. I think out of certain necessity, I've perhaps been more lonely, if they like it. I mean, I haven't made a lot of friends, if that's what they mean, and I haven't been to a lot of parties or anything. There haven't been very many. And I've had a lot of other things to do. I've been around Wales a lot and looked at things and visited people. And essentially it is, I suppose, compared with other people's lives, more lonely. And in this sense, I suppose I've had a lonely time.
You've also learned the Welsh language. Did you find that very difficult? Because most English tongues find it very difficult to get around.
Well, I think all languages are difficult, but I suppose there are certain things. I mean, the double L's are terrible. Well, they were fairly difficult, except that I went to Llanelli not long ago, and the mayor said, "Can you say Llanelli?" So I said, "Llanelli," and he wiped the saliva out of his eye and said, "Well done." But it's, there is a way of doing it. You put your tongue in a certain place and blow. And there are other things. I did learn German for a bit. And that doesn't really help because you tend to pronounce your S's like a Z. And in fact, you must pronounce it S. But I haven't found it too bad because I think I can imitate accents and things like that reasonably well. And it's helped to actually speak Welsh.
This comes from your acting ability, does it?
Well, I suppose it does. I think it's a help.
We've all been amazed by the marvelous progress that you've made. Is this entirely through the language laboratory, or did Mrs. Morvith Brennan, the lady who cleans your rooms, help at all?
No, the lady who cleans my room doesn't really know. She talks about the weather most of the time, in a splendid way, and occasionally attacks me with bore da, good morning. But no, I think I've done mostly through the language laboratory, which is a great help, because I think it's a marvelous idea to start off a language by listening to what people are saying in the language. I think you should go to the country, for instance, for, say, 6 months, then come back and learn the grammar, because, if you just do grammar all the time on paper, you don't learn very much. I know at school, I learned French for 10 years or something, and hardly ever spoke it. And whenever you spoke it, they all laughed at you, thought you were rather silly,
When you came to Wales, of course, there was quite a lot of strong anti-English nationalist feeling. Were you at all apprehensive when you went to Aberystwyth that this might in some way manifest itself there?
Yes, I was. I must say, I think this is due very much to the press, having read in the papers an awful lot about the sort of things that might happen and the anti-feeling there was in Aberystwyth and in Wales as well. Naturally, the misgivings built up, and one had an exaggerated picture of the whole situation.
You had a slight confrontation a year ago outside the Welsh office with the young chap in the crowd. You didn't seem to be able to communicate very much to each other. Have things got better now? Are you in touch with the Welsh nationalist people? I mean, Mr. Edward Millward, who's been your tutor, has been a prominent member of them.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I am. I mean, I've had many very interesting discussions with him particularly. And I want to meet the student nationalists. They did offer to meet me in the local milk bar, but I thought I'd choose my own particular site, you know. But at the moment, they're involved in exams, I think, and rather busy. And in fact, they haven't, you know, demonstrated too much. One of them tried to take a flag down at the beginning of term. But I've had some very interesting talks with Mr. Millward, and he's enlightened me a great deal about nationalist aims and ideas and policies.
Do you understand their aims and policies now? Is it something that you've come to understand, come to comprehend since you've been in Wales?
I think it is, yes. I mean, I think if I've learnt anything during the last 8 weeks, it's been about Wales in particular, and its problems, and what these people feel about Wales. You see, I think they feel so strongly about Wales as a nation, and it means something to them, and they're depressed by, you know, what might happen to it if they don't try and preserve the language and the culture, which is very unique and special to Wales. And if something is unique and special, I see it's well worth preserving.
How have you reacted to the rather more extreme elements? I believe you were stopped in the street not so very long ago by a group of anarchist students with a Mr. Peter Dawson, who said that the rich Duke of Cornwall should give away all his land and money. How do you react to that sort of thing?
I'm very well informed, I must say. How do I react to that sort of thing? Well, I suppose I try and look upon it with a certain amount of sympathy. I mean, I think it's wrong to just, you know, say, you're wrong, you know, therefore I don't want to listen to you. I try and understand what they're getting at and why they're getting at it. I'm not sure that, I mean, the anarchists, I don't know. You see, all the things that makes me suspicious is the fact that the press are always there when the anarchists appear. Well, they nearly always seem to be anyway. And I have a feeling that they go and tell them that they're going to demonstrate or do something. And it's publicity they want, I suppose, quite naturally.
Are you equally sympathetic to other minority groups that apply pressure to you? I mean, you can't go and buy an ice cream on Sunday, it seems to me, without someone stands up and says, what's he doing buying an ice cream on Sunday? You couldn't go shooting without it being brought up in the House of Commons. How do you react to other kinds of minorities?
Well, it is, as you say, it depends what sort of minority it is. I tend to get, I mean, it makes one very angry sometimes, you know, and annoyed that people should get worried about something seemingly so trivial. Like, for instance, the Sunday Observers Society, whatever it was, with our performance at Trinity, which was stopped. It did seem rather silly, but it is the law, I suppose, which I hadn't realized it was. And, you know, we had to stop it. You know, there are certain things like that which annoy one. But I try and stop myself and say, now, just think for a moment, you know, what's the point of it all?
This has all been part of a very carefully organized progress in your education. How much say have you yourself had in what you do and where you go next?
Quite a lot. I think, you see, now I have much more. But you must remember that when I was first going to school, I was too young, really, to know where were the best places to go. For instance, Cheam or Gordonstoun. When you're that age, you don't know what school's like, for a start. You've got nothing to base your judgment on. You've no previous experience. And with Cheam, I was sent there, and with Gordonstoun, I was told that I was consulted, and my parents are marvellous in this way, that they always outline all the possibilities. And in the end, it is up to you, but I like to, you know, to leave it to them. They know probably better in this case.
What happens after Trinity and finishing with archaeology and anthropology? What do you go on to? Is it going to be the army? Is it going to be management training? Or what do you have in mind?
First of all, I finished with archaeology and anthropology. I did that for 1 year, and I do history for 2 years. Well, I hope, I think, you know, a certain time in the services would be a very good idea. I think it gives one a very useful experience, very useful experience of responsibility and discipline. I think responsibility is the most important thing. Is the actual trust that's put in you to deal with other people. and the feeling that they can perhaps put their trust in you as well. And I think that if later on I'm to be associated with all three services, it'd be a very good idea to do an attachment with each one, probably.
You were mentioning discipline, and you previously mentioned your parents. How much influence has your father had on you? Is he as tough a disciplinarian inside the palace as he appears to be outside on occasions?
Does he appear to be a tough disciplinarian?
Yes, he does. Well, he seems to tell people exactly what they ought to be doing. Sit down and shut up. Has he ever said that to you?
Oh, the whole time, yes. It's very good fun, I think, anyway. Yes, I think he has had quite a strong influence on me. I think particularly in my younger days, I think, now I find that I'm becoming a bit more independent. I think, I don't know, maybe it's slightly late in developing, I'm not sure, but I know that having gone to Australia, I was thrown to the lion, so to speak. I'm sorry to the Australians. But,
or the kangaroos.
The kangaroos. And that, I think, made the whole difference to my development. I became much more independent. I felt more confident in myself, that I could do things, that I could actually go and talk to somebody without them talking to me first. And coming to Aberystwyth is the same sort of thing. I think, these sort of changes, these sort of challenges are all important. And my father's been, a great help in this sort of way. And he lets one get on with what you want to do. He gives one the opportunity to do these things. He hasn't said you will do this and that necessarily. He said, now, we think it might be an idea. What do you think? And in that sense, it's been an influence, a sort of moderating influence, and an influence of great wisdom, I think.
We inevitably see the Queen in the formality of public occasions. And yet we hear so many stories of her gaiety and sense of humor in private life. What do you most admire about the Queen?
Well, I think that's a terribly difficult question, but I mean, she's just a marvelous person and a wonderful mother. I tend to think of my family as very special people. I think most people think of their family as very special people. And in that sense, I'm only beginning to see my parents and the rest of my family as other people, do you know what I mean? That you look upon them as having their own different characteristics, that you look at somebody else and say, well, that person is nice and has this sort of characteristic. Well, the Queen has a marvelous sense of humour and is terribly sensible and wise and marvellous in that sort of way.
Your grandfather, King George VI, once said, we're not so much a family, we're more a firm. Do you feel a member of a firm?
A family firm.
A royal firm.
A family firm. I think that's probably put it right. I suppose so. I think in the sense that one's all doing the same job. It is a coordinating influence, I like to think of it more as a family rather than a firm, I think. It's a great help to have a lot of people all doing the same thing like that, because you can go and talk to them about it and your own experiences and the amusing things that have happened. And you can learn a lot from each other.
What sort of activities do you see yourself being able to engage in? King Edward VII, as Prince of Wales, was not allowed to do very much by Queen Victoria. King Edward VIII carried out these extremely successful tours of the Empire. But in a post-imperial Britain, how do you see yourself fitting in? What sort of thing do you want to do?
Well, there are always a lot of things, I think I want to do, and I don't think I can do them until I've had enough experience of the facts, and been informed of the facts. I think at my age is a time when one tends to become frightfully enthusiastic about certain things, over-enthusiastic, and you get carried away with the sort of things you might be able to do, and I mean, in Wales, I hope I can do all sorts of things. I'm involved in this countryside committee, and there are many other things. I think perhaps there's a certain amount can be done in the Commonwealth. Not, that one could do tours again, but more practical ones, associated with some individual job or some individual organisation.
Would you see yourself as the representative of Wales here? Because you are the Prince of Wales. It is a very unique country, as you yourself have said. It has its own language, its own culture, and so on. Would you see yourself primarily as a kind of Welsh ambassador?
I was asked this question the other day, and I didn't really like to think of myself as primarily a Welsh ambassador. I think my title does make it first and foremost, I suppose, a Welsh one, but I like to think that I can be for the United Kingdom as a whole and the Commonwealth. and generally be there to try and help in as many ways as I can if people want that sort of help.
Yes, but wouldn't you also grant the Welsh the fact that because of your title, because of your position, they do have some claim to exclusivity of you?
Oh, well, perhaps they do, yes. And I think it's so strange that nowadays, if you can put that in inverted commas, they seem to want this exclusiveness. You would have thought that it would have been something 800 years ago that it would have died out, you know, that the Prince of Wales was much more active. But now I think it's come back again, and as far as I can make out, people seem to want Prince of Wales to be more active and more exclusive.
Your other titles, Duke of Cornwall, Duke of Rotherhithe, Earl of Carrick, Baron of Renfrew, Lord of the Isles, Great Steward of Scotland, might seem to suggest that you're more closely identified with what's come to be called the Celtic fringe as a whole. Do you feel a special obligation towards the people who live in those parts of Britain?
Well, I'm beginning to put it that way, I suppose. I think that what one has to be so careful of is not to confine one's whole time to England, you know, where I think on the Celtic fringe everybody thinks that, you know, all the most important things go on in England and everything revolves around the Midlands and all the developments there and everything. And nobody really bothers about Scotland and Wales. And this is what I think has been so important about the General Assembly in Scotland recently when the Queen went. I thought it was a marvellous thing to go to Scotland. And I mean, the Assembly is almost the Scottish Parliament. And to give it that sort of recognition that the sovereign goes there for the first time for 400 or 300 years is a marvellous thing. And to take the Household Cavalry and the State Coach and to have the processions that you have in London, but not usually anywhere else, is marvellous. And I think you know, the people who live in these areas appreciate that.
Do you see these any more than decorative titles? They're a great, long and formidable list, aren't they, when you come to read them all off?
Well, inevitably, some of them are. I mean, they're not really meant to be particularly active ones. But on the other hand, it gives you a certain association with the place. And if they feel that you mean something particular to them, then perhaps you can again help in some way.
In the course of these commentaries that I do on royal and state occasions, one monument that comes very much to mind is that of Edward the Black Prince in Canterbury Cathedral, who brought into the royal line your motto, Ich dien, I serve. What interpretation do you put on that in this modern day and age?
Well, exactly that, I think. I think I serve is a marvellous motto to have. And I think that is the basis of one's job, you know, to serve other people. I think if you have a sense of duty, and I like to think I have, then service is something that you give yourself to people, if, you know, particularly if they want you, and sometimes if they don't want you, if you feel that you can do something, even if they think that, you know, you're not doing something very useful, and you think you're right there, then you can be of service, I think.
In these terms, you are, because of your position, because of your birth in this public position, but nevertheless, all your other interests, you play the cello, you're an actor, you tried your hand at journalism on one occasion when you wrote in Cambridge and so on. I always have the sense, though, that if you were not in this public position, you'd like to be an actor. Am I right?
Well, I've often thought about that, yes. I don't know really whether I could have been. I suppose I might. It's great fun, I love doing it. But whether I could do it professionally or not is another matter. It gives me great pleasure. And having an interest like that, you know, it keeps one sane, I think, in a sort of bustle.
But in the family, I mean, most families play charades and so on. Did you, as a boy?
No, continually. We always do. Absolutely. It's the greatest possible fun. Love it.
Do you have any thoughts about the lady that a Prince of Wales should marry? Should she still be a royal or titled lady?
Yes. Well, I suppose, you see, it's awfully difficult because you've got to remember that when you marry, in my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen. And you've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who could fulfill this particular role. Because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that. And it's got to be somebody pretty special. And the one advantage about marrying a princess, for instance, or somebody from a royal family, is that they do know what happens. You know, the only trouble is that I often feel I'd like to marry somebody English or
Welsh?
Perhaps Welsh. British. All right. Yes, I knew this would come.
Are you good at making friends and starting relationships? I mean, with all sorts of people. I don't just mean with women. At one time, you were reputed to be a very shy boy. Do you now find it much easier?
I think I do find it easier a bit, yes. I'm still fairly shy. I think one has to conquer this. You know, it's just one of those things that comes as you grow older. I don't, I think, make friends all that easily. Perhaps, you know, the position one is in builds up a little bit of a barrier. But I find now that I am making more friends, I think, yes.
You belong to a generation, after all, which seems to find the state of affairs around them very much less satisfactory than I think perhaps I did at your. One intended to accept more of what one found around one. Do you find yourself touched in any way by this general feeling of dissatisfaction and protest at what you see going on in the country?
A little bit. I think that people in this country don't realize just how lucky they are, really, when you think what happens in many, many other countries. I mean, I read in the paper the other day that Monsieur Poher, the French candidate for the presidential election, he said that he admired enormously the British system of democracy, and the BBC, for that matter. You know, the way that they could put on political broadcasts. Exactly. But, you see, I think that, particularly in universities, in Oxford and Cambridge, for instance, I think people don't realize they take things for granted. And they aren't as, you know, people in France, for instance, I don't think are nearly as lucky. I think probably the people in the Sorbonne have something to complain about. But not nearly so much at Oxford, Cambridge, or many of these other universities. But, I mean, I do try and understand what they're getting at. Some of them I don't understand what they're getting at. I can't help feeling that a lot of it is purely for the sake of change, and for the sake of doing something to change things, which from my point of view is pointless. You've got to do it constructively.
There are certain changes going on at Trinity at the moment. Do you approve of these?
Not entirely, not all of them, no. I don't know, I often feel that the whole fun of university life is breaking the rules, really. I should probably get sacked when I get back, but no, I think, you see, for instance, the gate hours have been abolished, where the gates were shut at 6 o'clock, or whatever it was, 6:15, and you could get in till 2 o'clock in the morning. But now I think they've been done away with altogether. Like, half the fun of Cambridge was to climb in at all hours of the night. And it was a great challenge. It's been going on for years. And what does it matter, really? And other things like that, which strike me as being slightly changed for change's sake. There are other things. I agree that, you know, the guest hours have been lengthened now for some time. You can have a girl in your room or anybody else in your room till 2 o'clock in the morning, I think, instead of 12 o'clock. Well, I mean, that's all right.
When you move into a wider range of public activities after the investiture, what do you see yourself doing? Is this Welsh Countryside Commission perhaps a pattern for what you want to do? And in which case, is it merely a matter of not having so much litter around, or would you like it to look at the proper use of the land, something more fundamental?
Oh, yes, but you must read the handout for the Welsh Countryside Committee, because it's not only the litter problem, it's the things that are there already, like the scars and the pit heaps and the slag heaps and all these things. I think perhaps a great deal can be done in the sense that you can give people in industry the encouragement to clear up these things themselves. I think if they feel that they can do it themselves, rather than be told to do it by the government or somebody else, which perhaps automatically makes them sit up and say, we won't, they might be able to get rid of it. But all these things cost money. This is the trouble. And where can you find the money? And how can these industries provide money when it's totally uneconomical to get rid of it? You know, it's not getting them anywhere. But
I'm sorry, would you like to live in Wales? Would you like to have a residence in Wales? It's the only country in which we don't have a royal residence, it seems to me. Would you like to set one up?
Well, as you probably know, they've already suggested Cardiff Castle as a centre where I might go. And this, perhaps, is quite a good idea. It would be a very useful place to go and spend a few nights and go visit parts of Wales and things like that.
Can we start looking ahead at the moment to next week, to the investiture? Mr. Gwynfor Evans, the Welsh Nationalist Member of Parliament, said on behalf of his supporters that they were anxious to protect you against exploitation by politicians in this context. Do you feel yourself exploited in any way on this?
No, I love the cry that I'm a political tool. The idea of being a political tool is so
You don't
marvellous
feel
anyway.
one, do you?
Not really, no. I hope not. No, I know I'm not exploited by politicians, personally. I mean, perhaps the investiture was encouraged and pushed by certain politicians. But, I mean, not as far as I can make out blatantly. I think, you see, it's a very convenient cry for people who are anti the investiture. And, you know, it's a very convenient one to hang on to, because it gives them a jolly good argument. And you say, anything you say to them, oh, well, you're being exploited, you know, and there it is. And it doesn't matter if you say, I'm not.
Did your great-uncle, Duke of Windsor, ever have occasion to talk to you about what he has described as this ordeal?
No, he hasn't. The first time I remember meeting him was at Princess Marina's funeral last year. I had met him, I suppose, when I was very small, and I hadn't remembered that. But he hasn't, no. But he was 3 years younger, and in a different situation, really. He was at Dartmouth, I think. And there he had friends of his own age who would tease him much more than perhaps mine.
Your Royal Highness, we've now come really full circle, because it's 11 years ago that your mother promised that she would present you to the people of Wales. You're now within days of going to Caernarfon Castle, a dramatic setting for this investiture of yours. What precisely does it mean to you? What will that day mean to you personally?
I think it'll probably mean quite a lot. I think on the whole I will be glad when it's over, put it that way. But that doesn't mean to say that I shan't get any meaning out of it. I think that, you know, it's very difficult. One can be so cynical about this sort of thing and think, well, oh, it's only a ceremony and some people are against it, and, you know, perhaps it's for television and, you know, it's just a show. Yes, one can think that. But I like to think it's something a little bit more than that, that perhaps it is a symbolizing Ich Dien, if you like. And in some way, perhaps if I think that, you know, all right, I'm the only one who thinks that, but it'll be an exhausting day and an enjoyable day, because I do enjoy ceremonies, and I think that the British people do them so very well, particularly with the Duke of Norfolk, who has been so marvellous. He's a wonderful man, and he does it so well. And with all the people, again, who've taken part and helped, I think with everybody, all these people who've done it, and a feeling that there will be, to hope that it's going to go well, I think it'll be a marvellous day, probably, as long as the weather stays fine.